Hello, I'm Peter Converse, Phil and Jean's oldest son. Before I talk about my dad, I'd like to express my family's appreciation for all of you for being here and celebrating my father's life. We'd especially like to thank everyone who traveled distances to be here, and also to thank everyone at ISR for helping arrange this. We especially would like to thank Pat Shields, who was absolutely instrumental in this celebration. Pat has become a family friend. My father would be thrilled that everyone is here today. I heard my father speak several times at memorial services, and he always began with a reading that I am certain he would want me to read today. It's from Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to plant, and a time to pluck up what is planted. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to rend, and a time to sow. A time to keep silence, and a time to speak. A time to love, and a time to hate. A time of war, and a time of peace. My father would want us to remember here that he had a long and wonderful life. No one knew that better than he. As he faced the end of his life, he said, "I've had a hell of a run," and he did. As others have noted today, he had a life of great accomplishment. His life was long, and it was very, very good. Most importantly, he found love, both for people and for ideas, and most especially for our mother. His Jean was the love of his life and the center of his life for over 65 years. My dad would tell all of us that his death was not a tragedy, although we mourn him and miss it very much. One of my father's great talents was his sense of time. He knew when to give in gracefully, and he knew when to stand fast. So he knew indeed that there is a time to be born and a time to die. And for us, as we think of him, there is a time to mourn him and a time to laugh. When I was about 12, my father came in and sat on the edge of my bed in that wonderful old house on Cambridge Road. And we had the conversation that was then known as the birds and the bees. He was really quite uncomfortable talking about this, and the conversation might have actually been kind of evasive or even mysterious. We certainly didn't talk about anything clinical. I didn't learn anything from him about how to talk to a girl I liked, or how to ask her out, or what to do after that. For that stuff, I was completely on my own. But he explained to me that the most important thing in most people's lives is love. My parents hoped that I would find love, and that I was entitled to love whomever I chose. They would support me in whatever choices I made. My father's own life was full of love, even if he did not express it emotionally very often. So I want to talk about some of the things that he loved. My dad really loved numbers. He loved to quantify things. He thought constantly about numbers, manipulating them in his own mind and what they represented. He loved statistics and the ideas of variability and predictability. He was fascinated during his genealogical efforts to discover that the family name of his mother, the Eatons, was 10 times more common than the name Converse in the United States, and that this pattern had held true since 1660. Rob Simmons has talked wonderfully about the statistical baseball games my dad so enjoyed. They were a big part of his life. As a teenager, I would sit listening with him to the radio as we listened to the baseball scores, and he ate his midnight snack. As I got older, I realized that he didn't love baseball. He loved the numbers of baseball. Of course, he played baseball as a child and even as a young man, but he didn't like going to baseball games. He loved the numbers of baseball. In fact, my own 9-year-old Little League team was unique in the United States, I think, because we had an in-house statistician who would generate multi-page analyses of each 9-year-old baseball game. My father really loved to laugh. Humor was one of his own ways of balancing his own intensity, and laughter was a very basic part of him. He loved the humor of Groucho Marx, and particularly his comment that Groucho would never want to join a club that would have a member like him in it. He howled at the Woody Allen inept bank robber, who ends up being arrested when none of the bank officials can understand his hold-up note, which reads, "Please give me all the money, I have a nug." His favorite was Monty Python, and he would arrange family viewing sessions when Monty Python was on. His love of laughter began surprisingly early. At age 6, his teacher was apparently frustrated with him for not knowing the answer to some question she posed to him. And his response was to say, "Me no speak the English." He told the story of the Indonesian transport minister who wanted his backward people to change from driving on the left side of the road to the right side of the road. But because they were not particularly sophisticated, he thought they should make that change gradually. He even found humor in his work. He, for years, told the story of the French visitor to our house who, when asked if he wanted a second helping of food, said, "No thank you, I'm fed up." I probably owe my own sense of humor to my father, and for that, my family will never forgive him. My father loved the University of Michigan, and of course, ISR. If some deity had designed the perfect organization for him to work at, and the people with whom he would spend his career, that deity would have created ISR. But he felt that way about the University of Michigan too, and it showed to us kids. My very first memory as a child was of him sneaking me into the empty University of Michigan football stadium. And in fact, he fell in love with the University of Michigan before he'd ever even seen it. He remembered lying on his bed at age 10 and listening to a radio broadcast of a University of Michigan football game and thinking that Ann Arbor sounded like a magical place. His first visit to Ann Arbor was while hitchhiking home from a summer job at age 18 from Wisconsin back to New Hampshire, where he grew up. The future professor rode into Ann Arbor on the back of a fruit truck down Huron Avenue, and when he saw the campus, he thought it was even more wonderful than he had imagined. My dad loved the idea of this university. He loved that it was a public school and available to the common person with talent and aspiration. He loved Michigan's dedication to research and that it aspired to do so much and had such an expectation of excellence. But his favorite t-shirt was not maize and blue. It was crimson, and it read, "Harvard, the Michigan of the East." My father loved his family. He had the good luck to spend his life with 3 extraordinary women. His mother, Evelyn, was an intelligent, educated, kind, and gentle woman with a sunny disposition. Her passions were music, nature, laughter, and family, all enthusiasms he inherited with pleasure. As Tim has mentioned, their home was very straight-laced, and Dad pushed back at these constraints, but it was a home full of gentleness and love. His older sister, Elizabeth, called Connie, was a person of extraordinary talents. My dad thought of her as a surrogate mother, intellectual mentor, and best friend. My dad told me that she was the smartest person he ever met. He loved being a father, too. We boys tested his patience, which was not unlimited, especially when he was younger. But he was an extraordinarily gentle man, and it's a lucky child to have a father like that. He had a way of conveying to us his expectations indirectly, rather than by edict. I learned from him how to be a father, and if I'm half the father he was, I'll be content. My dad also found unexpected joy in becoming a father-in-law. When he met Maureen, he took to her immediately and admired her intelligence, drive, and her own achievements. He appreciated the kindness, generosity, and love she showed both my parents. I once jokingly said to him, "You think Maureen walks on water?" And he replied, "Well, she does. I've seen it." Dad was a wonderful grandfather to my children, Ned and Aaron. Both he and my mother enjoyed acting childishly with them, which the kids adored. One of his favorite pictures, which you can see over there, shows my daughter Erin as an infant, interested in my father's tongue, which he has extended, and she's poking his tongue. He helped my children grow as people by being who he was, and they will miss him. As an adult, I realized that I had luckily won one of the big lotteries of life. I had the good fortune to have had extraordinary parents, for which I will always be thankful. I've never known a finer person than my father. But most of all, my father loved our mother. Their marriage lasted 64 years, and his life with Gina was a hell of a ride. When they met, he was the shy, bookish sort, a late bloomer in some ways, and a year younger than her. She was a smart, socially confident girl from Chicago's North Shore. But the shy late bloomer immediately moved to Evanston, Illinois, to begin his romantic pursuit of her. To her amusement, in order to make ends meet while he courted her, he even tried to sell cosmetics door to door. Not surprisingly, this experiment lasted one morning. My parents fit together almost perfectly, intellectually, politically, and even emotionally. Opposites attract, but in many ways my parents were really quite similar. They enjoyed the same intellectual pursuits and were both voracious readers. Their political views were very similar, and my father embraced my mother's activism. I think my father helped my father fight his own hermit tendencies and helped him become a more social person, which I think made him a better and happier person. As in any marriage, there was occasionally some conflict, although I never saw either parent treat the other with disrespect. If there was a serious disagreement, especially when we were young, they both kept the conflict under control. When my father declined seriously, having his Jean with him was really all that mattered. If she were absent for some reason, he was worried about her, and if she was with him, everything was fine. And at the very end, she was there with him, and sad though it was good. The best way to think of a person's life in the end is to imagine what other lives would be without that life. My father leaves behind a love and a marriage that those of us close by learned from and that my mother treasures. He leaves behind children and grandchildren whose lives have been profoundly affected by him. As others have said, he leaves behind scores of colleagues whose lives and work have been affected by him directly, and countless others who have read his work. He leaves behind a lot of people who simply enjoyed having a good conversation with him. Without my father, none of this would have happened. So as we finish this celebration of the life of my father and all those people and all those ideas he loved, let us mourn him and let us weep for him. Let us remember when to speak up and pray for peace. But above all, Let us laugh.